now and see if I can get my windows out of the way. So welcome. This is the Arizona Geographic Information Council Natural Resources Presentation Series. Wow, that's a mouthful. We're super excited to have you join us. Today we're going to be focusing on the geospatial side of forestry health and protection. I think many of you know me. I am the Deputy State Cartographer for Arizona. My name is Jewell 𝐁𝐫𝐢𝐳𝐶. With me, I have some of the folks from the Natural Resources Workgroup that are supporting this event today. So I'm pleased to introduce Elizabeth Vanderloos. She is one of our co-chairs. She's going to be helping me moderate today. Elizabeth, her video is on. She can wave at everyone. We also have 𝐀𝐫𝐈𝐂, and she's going to be helping me moderate the chat. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. 𝐀𝐫𝐈𝐂 is also going to be sharing some links as I give a welcome and as we go through the presentations. So again, thank you for coming. Couple of housekeeping things. You can see that I've got the agenda up. We had a few last-minute changes. So we'll be close to what you've seen in your email and what's on the screen, but it's going to be a little different. So unfortunately, Carrie Dennett from the BLM, our fuel specialist for Arizona for the BLM, ironically had to go and handle a fire. So she was unable to join us today, and we'll sure miss her. So we've given more time and kind of adjusted things a little bit to make up for that. We will certainly miss her. So because of that, our breaks are going to be adjusted a little bit. We'll have 2 5-minute breaks, one at 2:05 and one at 3:10. The other person that had a last-minute conflict that was unable to join us was our other co-chair from the Natural Resources Workgroup, Jeremy Johnson, and we're sad that he could not join us, but we're covering. So it's going to be a great afternoon. Couple other things to remember: to mute yourselves. We're going to limit video to just presenters to try and make this the best experience possible. So you will be able to have presenter mode in your WebEx if that's what you choose. Again, with the chat, that's how we're going to communicate. You are able to take yourself off mute if you have a complicated question, and 𝐀𝐫𝐈𝐂 and I will be monitoring the chat, so we'll be able to call on you. You are welcome to virtually raise your hand as well if you have questions. We really want this to be interactive, so please feel like you can share. For those of you that are not familiar with AGIC, I want to just give kind of a broad overview of the Arizona Geographic Information Council. So what we do, we are a governor-appointed board that provides recommendations and is the primary forum for geographic information technology, as well as data sharing and coordination across the state. So the board itself oversees many committees. One of the things that we focus on is identifying standards and developing best practices and guidelines to provide a framework for Arizona so that everyone can access authoritative data and make data-driven decisions. Through our cooperations and partnerships, we facilitate the acquisition, exchange, and management of GIS information and technology for the state of Arizona. One of the things that I have to say more than once is that we have an amazing community. We're powered by volunteers almost entirely, including the board, and it works. It's, without all of the dedication of the volunteers, we couldn't do what we do. So I am super grateful. Many of you that are on the call are also volunteers for AGIC, so you understand and contribute to the community. If any of you on the call are new to AGIC, please know you're welcome, and you're welcome on any of our committees. We believe in diversity, and diversity of ideas really powers all of the creativity and ability for us to coordinate in Arizona. We've just done a really great job. So one of our groups specifically that is hosting this series is our Natural Resources Workgroup. Their mission is to facilitate geospatial data sharing and tools to support natural resource work across Arizona. This group provides a forum for information exchange, particularly related to geospatial information. This group wants that to enhance and support government, tribal, private, and nonprofit resource efforts through coordination and identification of cost-sharing opportunities, and that results in more work being done on the ground more efficiently. We're very proud of our ability to connect and make an impact in the community. So one of the things that this group is doing is providing 2 presentation series like this annually. So we have this one in the spring. We also participate in the annual GIS conference that AGIC puts on, as well as a winter series. Many of you came to see our regional series last December that was focused on Southern Arizona. We'll have another one this year focused on a different region of Arizona. So we look forward to that. We also have a community page on 𝐀𝐫𝐤𝐳𝐚, the state clearinghouse. This page is meant to bring the natural resources community together in data sharing and collaboration. So Yata has put that link in the chat. Please go and visit us. It is a living page, so it will change. Keep coming back. We also have several work groups that are associated to this group, subgroups, so to speak. One of them is focused on improving water data for Arizona. They're working on a pilot to enhance the NHD, the National Hydrography data set, and they're working very hard to make that better for all of Arizona. We're kicking off a data inventory effort as well for natural resources specifically in Arizona. So if anybody is more interested in that, you are welcome to join us. So with all of that, I am excited to introduce our first speaker who's going to kick off our event. Welcome to the ASU Kyle Center for Water Policy. Susan Craig and Nick Carroll are going to provide us with a big picture of health and function of Arizona's watershed. We thought that this would set the stage very nicely for all of the discussions to come today. So I am excited to introduce Susan. I will give short bios as soon as I stop sharing and hand over controls to Susan. Susan, are you the one that's going to be sharing? Excellent. You are muted.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. And Nick, you are probably also muted. So Susan, I've given you control. You should be able to share your screen. I'd like to just remind everybody to mute yourselves and turn off your video. So with no more ado, Susan Craig, she's a water policy analyst for ASU's Kyle Center for Water Policy at the Morrison Institute, Susan drives projects on water resilience, having worked for Arizona's 3 primary state water agencies, the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, Arizona Department of Water Resources, and Water Infrastructure Finance Authority. Susan has extensive knowledge in the state's water issues, policies, and players. She is passionate about the environment and water use efficiency. Nick Carroll at ASU's Kyle Center for Water Policy. Nick Carroll creates and manages content for publicly accessible, interactive online mapping applications related to water resources in the state. He is a soon-to-be graduate of Arizona State University's Master of Urban and Environmental Planning program. Previously, Nick worked in Parks and Recreation and Environmental Education with the National Park Service, Arizona State Parks and Trails, and Coconino County. His professional and academic experiences reflect a passion for public service and environmental stewardship. Nick looks forward to contributing his planning and GIS expertise to more projects that impact decision-making, quality of life, and quality of the environment. Thank you both. I'll hand it over.
Thanks, Jenna. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled to be introducing our new watershed story map on the health and function of Arizona's watersheds, and I do hope that it sets a good stage for what's to come today. So our story map is a true collaboration. We really could not have done it without the knowledge and resources of the diverse team that we worked with. So just a little bit about that. I think it's important to understand how we put this together. The Kyle Center partnered with the University of Arizona. Yep, University of Arizona, ASU working together. We worked with the Arizona Project WET team, the Water Education for Teachers, and working with them on having them on the team really helped us create a product that can benefit what we think audiences of all ages, can be used by teachers and students, interested citizens, and with their expertise, I think we were able to create a more engaging story map, something there where we can activate learning. We also were fortunate enough to work with the National Forest Foundation. The National Forest Foundation, Rebecca really helped us connect the forest to water. And so all throughout the story map, you're gonna see these strong connections. So as Jenna said, Nick is the Kyle Center's GIS specialist. He developed the story map, and it's with his skill that we were able to put together the cool maps and the data that you see. I am by no means a GIS expert. I just recently got into GIS and absolutely have become more of an evangelist for it. I really see the power that it brings, and so I'm happy to be working on these projects that relate. So as a team, we were able to put together, I think, a really comprehensive tool and lots of information. I don't have to tell you all how important the platform of story maps is because you probably do them a lot, but we are super happy that we found this format to be able to produce what we are able to and have things update in real time and making the information dynamic. And we worked for state agencies for about 20 years and realize, just the power of this compared to a static map or a PDF report. So you'll find the new story map on the Arizona Water Blueprint website. So I'm just going to spend a second on that. Also a powerful GIS tool. But as part of the Kyle Center's work in developing the Arizona Water Blueprint, we held design workshops with over 200 experts in economic, land use, environmental, development, all kinds of experts. And we asked them, what are the main topics that we want? What are the main stories that we want to tell? And so watersheds rose to the top. And so we made that a priority and we worked with our partners to create this. If you haven't had an opportunity to check out the blueprint, I would encourage you to do so. Here's how the web page looks like. You can see the website there. In addition to our story maps, we also have the web viewer, our map viewer, and it's a data-rich interactive map of all of Arizona's water resources and infrastructure. It's our most popular feature. It hosts over 55 data layers, all related to water resources. And really, we designed it so that we could have more informed discussion and better solutions ultimately. So we utilized a lot of the data from the blueprint for our story map. We have 4 other story maps that we've created, and then we also have a new groundwater level change app that we're launching next week, or excuse me, tomorrow we're launching. We're super excited about what impacts this might have. So a little bit about our story map. As you all know, watershed and forest health are integral parts of our water story. We depend on water for our public health, economic opportunity, and quality of life. And any story about watersheds is a story about land and water. And of course, changes in the land affect our water quality and our supply. So this map tries to connect our water supply in Arizona to the landscapes that we depend on, both in the natural environment and the built environment. We drill down to the relationships between land and water as we study forest health and devastating wildfire, why we need to manage pollution, and what climate change means for our watersheds and Arizona's amazing biodiversity. So our story map walks you through the function of a watershed, the importance of having a healthy watershed, and we've identified those as promoting biodiversity, providing recreation, filtering pollutants, and controlling floods. And what impacts health, meaning increasing temperatures, drought conditions, climate change, unnatural wildfire, and then excessive soil erosion, pollution, and sedimentation. And the last section of our story map talks about involvement. And we really try to hone in on the fact that everyone is a watershed manager and what their role is or what they can potentially do as they learn about protecting our land and water. So our focus today, since it's on healthy forests, we're going to highlight a few things that will hopefully be of interest to you. And I sort of am like, dare I talk about forests with this group, but I'm going to try. So bear with me as I go through this. Millions of residents in Arizona, local and downstream communities and farmers depend on our forested landscapes to control runoff and filter pollutants from entering our water supply, the water that we drink, and really ultimately affect our long-term water resiliency. So the water we drink is connected by our common watersheds, and the forests really are as important as snow, rain, rivers, all the reservoirs and canals that we depend on here in Arizona. So we have this section in our story map called Forest Fires, the Good, the Bad, the Ugly. And so we look at historic fires where the natural fire regime has this low intensity ground fires to rejuvenate soils and maintain open structures. This idea of having open park-like diverse undergrowth. Whereas today we have dense stands of trees that feed wildfires that are burning hotter and more intensely, resulting in fast-moving crown fires that scorch the entire landscape down to the soil. And this, of course, devastates our landscapes and impacts our water supply. So we have a video, hopefully it shows up a little bit. It's on the Schultz fire, and it shows what happens after a major fire where you don't have vegetation to absorb rain and the stormwater that runs down these burn slopes and causes water quality and flooding impacts at the lower elevations in the watershed. So hopefully this will come across the message.
What happens after a fire and it rains? Wow.
So we also decided that it was important to highlight projects that are being done to restore unhealthy forests because they really play an important role in reducing fire risk, improving water quality, and keeping our watersheds healthy. So we worked with the National Forest Foundation. We put in a few success stories and the impacts of those restoration projects that keep our watersheds healthy. And at the end of this section, we talk about who is doing what in Arizona's forests. So if you don't see your link here, I think we should talk because there's probably a lot of feedback that you all might have that we can use and collaborate on. And another thing that I personally love about story maps and anything GIS is just that we can update it continually. So to sum it up, we really just want people to know that resilient forests protect our water supplies and make our communities safer, provide recreational opportunities, and our healthy forests strengthen our economy and enhance our quality of life. So woven deeper into this story is the impact that climate change has on the resilience of our forests, our water resources, and biodiversity. And I think everyone can agree at this point, hopefully, that modeling's predicting that the southwestern US is going to get warmer and drier. And, heavily developed areas like Phoenix and Tucson, they're going to even see a greater warming trend because of the urban heat island effect. And so higher temperatures are going to affect our surface water supplies, our soil moisture, plant life, and snowpack, all critical factors for life in Arizona. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to pass it over to Nick. He's going to show more of the cool stuff of our story map, the functionality, and the resources that it provides.
Thanks, Susan. So as we've shown here, each of these themes, each element comes together to tell the full story of Arizona's watersheds. And what's great about the story map platform that it allows us to complement this multifaceted narrative with a mosaic of multimedia content. So as you can see in the demo here, we've included images, videos, animations, and of course, maps. So this creates a really unique interactive experience for users, as Susan mentioned. They're able to explore, engage, and connect with the information at their own pace and in a personal way. So what I'd like to do in the next few slides is dive into a bit of detail share some more video demonstrations, and highlight some of the geospatial features on the story map. So Susan, if you'd like to go to the next slide, please. So the first few maps that we have, they orient the user, they provide some background knowledge about our watersheds. We present some context at a small scale before moving on to examples and more details at a larger scale. So the demonstration now is showing some general stats about watersheds, annual precipitation. Then it moves into the Salt Verde River system, zoomed in with a map that focuses more on infrastructure
How
in a watershed.
Home from the watershed is a complex process.
This is an example of
Tributaries,
audio and visual content combined.
and Verde rivers. As water travels, it recharges our groundwater. Once released to meet demands, a portion of our water is delivered to farmlands and agricultural crops. The majority of it is carried through SRP's canals to city treatment plants, where that water is made potable and delivered to homes and businesses.
So this combination satisfies all sorts of different learning styles. The maps, the videos, the images can engage a wide range of users. As Susan mentioned, those just interested in watershed health, all the way to students and general public. And then multiple links offer opportunities to learn even more about particular topics of interest. And Susan, when you're ready, we can go to the next slide. Oh, that's nice. So some more cool features. These are part of our managing and monitoring water resources section. So here users can explore Department of Environmental Quality surface water assessments. Then they can explore DWR's groundwater site inventory. And then they arrive at this map, which displays USGS and NOAA stream gauges. So what's really neat about this one is that flow measurements and graphs are real-time. They're updated daily. And additional links lead to more information, including this one. Goes to the Natural Resources Conservation Service and shows snow water equivalents. So again, just reinforcing those connections between our watersheds, snowfall, surface water, all of this that's outlined in the narrative. We just reiterate those points through maps, graphs, and real-time information. If you'd like to go to the next one. The next map I'd like to share is included in our fire themed section, which displays fire incidents from 1910 to 2017. This is a great visual feature that again complements the narrative and reinforces the concepts that were introduced, namely the frequency and intensity of forest fires have increased dramatically over time. And we know that drought and climate change will only exacerbate the problem. So there's a time loop that's set to automatically begin and display fires by decade. Users can also take control, explore specific decades and specific fire incidents. So this fire information was retrieved from the National Interagency Fire Center, which compiles data sets from a number of different agencies. We can go to the next one, Susan. Susan mentioned some of the restoration projects and the National Forest Foundation partnership that was involved. So this encouraged us to highlight a handful of the projects that are occurring in national forests. And on the story map, we're able to enhance the reading and learning experience with a guided tour of this information. So for each project, we can show where work is occurring. We can describe its significance to the overall narrative and bring it to life with photos and videos. So the users can scroll through and explore at their own pace. Again, an interactive and engaging experience, and numerous links provide additional details and information. We can go to the next, Susan. So just sort of wrap up, just want to say that this project does tell a critical big picture story about Arizona's watersheds and the elements that are interconnected within each one. But it is more than just a story. The story map is a resource in and of itself. It connects users to a multitude of extended learning opportunities. And it's also a call to action. As Susan mentioned, there are lots of ways to get involved, and we've included links to conservation programs, citizen science activities, and organizations to volunteer with, because we do truly believe that the actions of our readers can make all the difference. So I hope you will do some exploring of your own on the story map and share it with others.
Thanks, Nick. Sorry, Jenna, if we went a little bit over, I do apologize. I hope that you all will find this to be a valuable resource, and we welcome any feedback.
Thank you, Susan. No need to apologize. I think, we'll mitigate. It'll be just fine. So unfortunately, as Susan said, we're just a little behind schedule. If you have questions for Susan and Nick, please put them in the chat and they can interact with you in the chat. For now, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next presenters. Wolfgang, I am making you presenter, so you should be able to share your screen now. And it is with pleasure that I introduce the Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management. Today we have Wolfgang Grunberg and Matthew Jewell. They'll be presenting on Geoenabling DFFM forestry programs and services. Wolfgang Grunberg is a GIS coordinator at the Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management, where he works on forestry projects and wildland fire incidents. Trained in natural resource GIS and remote sensing at the University of Arizona, Wolfgang spent a couple of decades on developing applied natural resource information systems for the University of Arizona. Systems for the University of Arizona, Arizona Geologic Survey, Arizona Game and Fish Department, and now Arizona Forestry. He still can't get enough of Arizona's big sky and public lands. We're fortunate to have Wolfgang be part of our community. Matthew Jewell is the Southeastern Forester at the Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management. He works on forestry and fire projects using and relying on GIS technology to get projects done efficiently. Matthew got his degree in natural resource management at the University of Arizona. Matthew has both federal and state government experience working for the Forest Service, National Park Service, and the Arizona State Land Department, and now the Department of Forestry and Fire Management. In his spare time, he likes to hike and camp with his family. Arizona is home. Thank you, guys. Wolfgang, you may be muted. We cannot hear you.
Okay, so I'm just gonna turn off our video because of bandwidth issues.
Yep.
I hope that our presentation looks okay.
It looks great.
Hey, thanks for the introduction, Jenna. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Am I still muted? So, yeah, please go.
Wolfgang, you may have muted yourself again.
No, I'm just trying to. There
you go. Okay. There you are.
Oh, I'm having technical issues. We're good now.
Sorry, I'm using Wolfgang's computer, and I'm not quite used to it. Anyway, I'm here today kind of to talk about the forestry programs and obviously the GIS tools and we use to tell that story. It's going to be a really crash course in what we do. We've kind of focused on three main lines of business: forestry, fire, and then the fire marshals. We're going to talk about a lot of tools and services we use, but we don't necessarily endorse them. That's what the disclaimer is down here. And then we're obviously going to talk about 𝐀𝐫𝐤𝐳𝐵 at the end as well. So as you see, there's 3 lines of business. We deal with wildfire suppression and prevention, state fire marshals that go and make sure everyone's up to code, and then forestry. See the list of programs there. All of those kind of, especially the wildfire side and the forestry side, all have to do with grants management. So helping people meet their land management goals and objectives to make communities safe and also function on an ecological level. So I work a lot in this program, and there's a couple of other foresters that are on this meeting here, but the Forest Stewardship Program, it's a free and voluntary program for private landowners to write and be a part of a land management conservation plan. It connects, private landowners with the Forest Service and their own and provides a comprehensive land management plan that's unique to them, dealing with forests and woodlands across the state. It deals with timber products, biochar, anything like that, cut wood for sale, provides wildlife habitat, watershed protection, recreation, anything like that, and even cattle grazing opportunities as well. The goal of that program is to kind of increase land management capacity. And again, it's kind of an integrated forest management approach. And it actually brings in a lot of different funding to help them attain those goals on their land. As an agency, we're asked to at a minimum produce 50 forest stewardship plans for forest and woodland ecosystems here with private landowners. We do use several tools, GIS tools, to accomplish that goal. One of them is a stewardship mapping reporting tool. It is a required reporting tool that that we have to report to the Forest Service. So it's a way to, it's a GIS, it incorporates GIS tools, ArcMap, and other kind of tools. Survey 123 is a tool that we use in our shop that feeds into this reporting tool. But it's meant to set up for long-term management of these and monitoring. And the Forest Stewardship Plan is a required plan to have to apply for our grants. And I know it's some kind of conservation plan is mostly a requirement for any kind of grant for federal programs as well. But this is the tool we use, stewardship mapping reporting tool. You can kind of see it has some general information. So a lot of us use Survey 123, upload that data into here, and then you can write the entire plan here. You can break it up, as you can see on the screen here, you can break it up into stands. So you manage the stands differently. But it's a really kind of a spiffy organization tool that the Forest Service provides for us. The second program I work a lot in is the Forest Legacy Program. That program is, you can have, private landowners or nonprofits that are going to be applying for essentially a conservation easement to protect their land in perpetuity. So a lot of what I work with is conservation easements on private land, usually that abut to state lands or federal lands. It's an increased local collaboration effort. A lot of the time, these private landowners are working with us. They're working with their local counties or other state agencies or federal government. So it's a good effort to set aside some land, for them to either sell their land off as a fee simple or they through a conservation easement. It's a long-term plan. Like I said, it is in perpetuity. It gives clear guidance and land management goals and objectives. Right now, currently, we have 1,038 acres that are part of this program that we've put forward. And then there's a link there to our legacy program. Another reporting tool that we have to put in with the Forest Service is called the Forest Legacy Information System, and this is version 2.0. Obviously, there was another version, but they've made some upgrades. This project actually these are the conservation easements we have currently that are protected. We have several other projects going on right now, but they're not quite finalized yet. But this is a tool. It's geospatially linked to, boundaries and different funding sources and different years, because a lot of these are multi-year projects and multi-funding sources. So it's a great way to organize and kind of keep track. A lot of this information was fed in, using ArcGIS to feed into this program. Again, it's a required annual reporting tool. Yeah, so we use that all the time as well. The invasive plant grant or the invasive plant program. Again, the goal is to prevent, control, and eradicate the non-natives and not invasive plants most of the time. As you guys, I'm sure know, we do a lot with tamarisk removal, and here's on the picture is stink net. That's kind of all up in the Phoenix area, and we do a lot with that. But we provide technical assistance to agencies, landowners, and organizations. Again, it's a collaborative effort. Usually, the grant itself takes multiple people from different, like private sector or state agencies or federal agencies to come together and identify these different priority areas to treat, and then usually someone writes a grant based off that decision. The invasive plant grant coordinator oversaw $1 million in invasive plant grants in 2020. That number is going to be growing, I'm sure. This is a picture of actually a tool that Wolfgang created, the invasive plant treatment prioritization area. You can see on the side there, analysis parameters is kind of what went into making those 1 square mile hexagons, assessing the risk from low to high. So it uses existing kind of invasive plant data gathered on the ground, and it's put into this nice map here that's used all the time by us and the agency to make decisions actually on what we're going to be funding for grants and whatnot. And it also accounts for the treatment efforts. Again, so it's a really spiffy tool that we use quite a bit. So yeah, and then there's a link up there to the program. So that's about it for me. I'll give it off to Wolfgang.
All right. So the Forest Health Program is another one we have of the many, and they concentrate on preventing insect disease outbreaks and really try to achieve a healthy forest and woodland stand conditions there. Most of the work, again, is on private and state lands, doing monitoring of forests and woodlands. So it's not just the big forests, but also riparian areas and including urban forests as well. Provides a lot of technical assistance. They also oversee a grant for state and federal funding sources. Again, this is all for private and state land. And there's a link to the program. The picture you're seeing is actually what we're going to talk next. This is an aerial detection survey that we do annually. So the program's job is to collaborate with the Forest Service essentially one of them and one of us flying in the same plane with a pilot. And they fly about 17 million acres every year to identify forest and insect disease agents, host species, essentially what's being affected, and acres associated with it. And they use this the digital mobile sketching and mapping app, DIMSUM, I think they call it internally, which is something the Forest Service developed using some Esri toolbox. Don't know the specifics. But the goal is to inform state, federal, tribal stakeholders, and our federal partners deal with federal and tribal stakeholders, and us, we deal with the state stakeholders, and we come up with the annual Arizona Forest Health Conditions Report, as you can see to the right. And it looks grim every year. It's not getting better, I'm sorry to tell you. The Urban Community Forestry Program, they deal with technical assistance and education and providing resources for urban communities and areas to deal with what the urban forest is. The picture in the background, I really like it because until I saw this side angle photo, I never thought that there was an urban forest in Phoenix, but there is such a thing. I believe in it now. So the idea is to restore, improve, and maintain our urban forest ecosystems. So to do that, they provide services to urban communities, incorporated and NGOs and neighborhoods and HOAs and whatnot. The important part is strategic planning so that we can start looking at it statewide and not just piecemeal. Provide all these technical assistance and public outreach, such as the little handout to the right, which is a very nice handout about the benefits of the urban forest in Phoenix. You can click on get to it through the link once you see the PDF. It also oversees public, state, and federal community forestry grants. Last year it was $150,000, and there's a link to the program itself. So part of the geospatial component of this UCF program is analysis we did in 2017. It's a shade tree planting prioritization analysis. And the goal was to inform, again, program actions and planning so that we act strategically and we can identify gaps. And empower communities, that was important. With empowering communities meant also trying to identify underserved communities. Account for commitment to urban forests, because sustainability is the big deal. Forests, I mean, these trees live a long time, and commitment is necessary to warrant all these efforts and investment. And for that, we use the Tree City USA program, and you might have heard of it. There are several of them for cities, for campuses, and also for utility companies. And then, of course, inform the public. You can get the data and the report associated with it from our website, as well as from AGIC. And to the right, you can see the parameters went into it. In this case, we're looking at Tempe. All right, next program. This is the Hazardous Fuels Reduction Program. They are worked quite closely with our fire side of the business, the three business pillars we have. And they have this big responsibility to remove hazardous vegetation for fire prevention and critical infrastructure protection and forest and watershed restoration, and as well as develop a wood product industry. And as you might know, we don't have much of a wood product industry in Arizona compared to other states, and it's quite an effort to come up with something that's viable, but that's part of the job of this program. So all these services are provided for private and state lands. There is strategic fuels reduction planning, again, trying to approach it strategically across all of Arizona, including collaborating with federal and tribal partners. oversee, I think, $3 million in public and state fuel reduction grants. That was last year. Again, this is going up. And as well as they manage 31 products, and actually a fuel reduction project that we do ourselves. So it's not just pass-through grants. And then, of course, inform the public with the Arizona Wildfire Risk Assessment Portal, Arizona, and that's the one I'm showing you here. So this Arizona Wildfire Risk Assessment Portal, or AZRAP as I call it, is essentially two parts. One is the data, which is a model analysis that was done on behalf of the Council of Western State Foresters, and it was completed in 2013. It's a 30-meter resolution data set, and it's the best that I've seen so far at that resolution for Arizona. And that data set determines the local wildfire risk and threat levels. The second part is the application. This is the link that leads you to the application. It allows you to interact with the data. There's a public component, which is essentially assess your location. And then there's a professional one where you can import polygons and generate reports if you want to do some more land management related activity, or if you're more interested in providing your own footprints. This leads us to not a program, but the current effort to try to come up with a holistic information system across a lot of our work processes in our agencies, in our programs. And so the Arizona Forestry Information Tracking System, I'm talking about the big questions, the history, and so the big questions have been a long time from my point of view, where coming from the governor's office, essentially, where are you treating and where did our money go? And the answer to that was in 2005 to build the Arizona Fire Map that was later then renamed Southwest Fuels Treatment. And I would like to send a shout out to the old State Cartographer's Office crew, Gene Trobia and Glenn Bittner and other folks who actually were working on this in 2005 to 2011 about. And after that, in 2019, now the answer is easy fit. From a development point of view, my big question is always, where do I start? Because in a simplest form, we can think about information flow as going from people entering information, creating data, essentially, data feeding into tools, and then tools are supporting people again. And the whole thing sits in some kind of process cloud, and that process cloud, it can be information processes, it could be business processes. I think even social and cultural processes are part of this soup. And in my case, in this case, we started with capturing relevant data first, and deciphering the business processes at the same time. So going to next. Where is 𝐀𝐈𝐂 now at? So the goals of building 𝐀𝐈𝐂 in 2019 was, I'm trying to get rid of this thing. Okay, now it's better. Sorry. The goals were real-time reporting to the governor's office, to follow the money, and do a rapid design process and implementation process. And to quote Glenn Bittner, pick something, stick to it. And then, of course, that's my big one, sustained data quality. It's the tool is not worth anything if the data is not good and relevant. So the results of this effort, it was essentially, took us 1.5 years to unify our attributes and create domains across 6 programs, and more importantly, trying to come up with something that works across multiple federal, state, and local funding sources and essentially money flow processes. It also took us that long to capture 280 projects from paper maps, PDFs, AML files, and transcribing the whole thing and then digitizing about 1,400 polygons. So and then it took us a year in parallel, kind of, to find and customize and deploy an online records management and editing interface. I'm going to be talking a lot about that. And the funny thing is, it took me just a day to create the first dashboard, an online situational awareness dashboard. It was very surprising where the big efforts had to be for me. Now, this unified attribute system, you can see to the right in blue, those are the attributes. It's a very simplistic one-to-one table. Essentially, one pot of money represents one project done on the ground and one multi-part polygon. So this whole thing was really a close collaboration with the Arizona Department of Emergency and Military Affairs. And so why do we needed them to fulfill actually this need? And this application goal was empowering process owners to maintain their own data. We don't have the GIS staff to do it for them, so we need program managers and administrators to update the records themselves. So DEMA provided us help through a service they have a licenses for that's called WebUSC. And they gave us 50+ licenses. It's all for free because we're piggybacked on an interagency agreement. And they developed this custom WebUSC board that you're looking at here. They're also providing tech support. And all this stuff that's happening in WebUSC, it's synchronized with ArcGIS Online, with an ArcGIS Online feature service. And again, I would like to send a shout out to the DEMA collaborators, Eric Shreve and Dave Roby and Thomas Vetsky, okay, I'm sorry, and Pam Grimm, of course. So this is kind of what the editing interface looks like. It's not a big deal if you have a home, an in-house development shop. We don't have that. So for me, this was just really, really nice because it's easy, it's guided, there's quality control mechanisms built in, and DEMA is doing it for us. So I can submit a ticket if I have an issue. It's just wonderful. And the data edits you see in here then feed to a feature service in our ArcGIS Online organization that we have. And then we can do all this stuff that you guys do in ArcGIS Online. In this case, you see actually what I call the governor's dashboard. And again, you can go to the link you see at the bottom right to get to it. This is essentially our situational awareness dashboard with relevant information at a glance. That's the goal. And by the way, it takes about 15 seconds to sync between the feature service and WebUSC. This means I can use ArcGIS Pro or whatever desktop software to do bulk geometry edits and attribute updating and calculations, and of course, custom maps and reports as needed. So they say if it's one thing was such a success that people ask for more. We want more. And then on top of it, the Arizona Healthy Forest Initiative kicked off this year, or is about to kick off. And that is a big effort by the state, and it has a very large impact on our forestry programs. So suddenly we need strategic to tactical situational awareness. We need automated accomplishment reporting, and especially custom reporting as well. We need some kind of WebUSC-like intuitive one-to-many records management and editing. What I mean with one-to-many is that now attributes looks more like this. We have one project polygon that has multiple child implementation unit polygons, and the implementation unit polygons have accomplishment unit children. And of course, we have also photo points. And all of these have complex attributes that we somehow need to summarize. And the whole thing needs to be done also in the field so that we can submit accomplishment reports and data through field editors so that Matthew can do it up on Mount Lemmon or wherever he's going. And the other big part is we're likely going to get 36+ new crews, hazardous fuels and timber crews. We're going to be doing actual big-time forestry. And those have to be managed. And then on top of it, there are all these workflows we haven't figured out yet. They need to be supported and enforced. And of course, as usual, make it fast, flexible, and cheap. And at that point, I felt like, let's go to the pros. I'm not going to do this. And I started looking last year at products from, let's say, Salesforce, or Trimble offers some natural resource information systems, and there's other forestry-specific information systems such as Things Connect, I think it's called. They are all a serious commitment. They are flexible in a way of, yeah, pay us and we program it for you. And we are not at the point where we know exactly what our workflows are. And I was a bit of an impasse because it's a serious commitment to deal with these big solutions. And thankfully, I was handed a breakthrough from the Nevada Division of Forestry. And a shout out to Aaron Taveras, their GIS data manager. He essentially handed me over a stack of possible solutions, and this is the experimental system stack that I'm using right now to figure out what 𝐀𝐈𝐂 will be. Now, it's not proven it's going to work. I don't know yet. But the stack looks like this, and I'm going to go through it briefly. So the big components are GIS Online because I'm GIS biased. And the really important part is that feature services do support method one-to-many relay. And I didn't know this a year ago. Then using field maps, for example, for the weekly forestry ops accomplishment reporting, that includes feature edits and not just attribute edits. Then using Survey 123 for the daily workforce kind of status update of workforce management. Then use App Builder, for example, for the standard mapping and an interim solution for attribute editing, but I'm not happy with it at all. And then, of course, use Dashboard, Experience Builder, and whatnot to do strategic, just situational awareness efforts, and you've seen a lot of those probably. And then the weakest point for me is the need for a custom web app that is intuitive, that helps us to do records management and attribute editing, similar to what WebUOC does. However, WebUOC does not support one-to-many, to my knowledge. So that's the part that I don't know how we're going to handle, and I would love to hear from you guys. The second part, the big part, is Integromat. Integromat, I'm sure there are other services as well, but this is one that has been pretty widely used now. As an intuitive way to create extract, transform, load processes to automate through webhooks, essentially integrating ArcGIS Online and Google in our case, for generating PDF reports and updating spreadsheets and data loading and syncing and emailing, all these automated processes. And then at the bottom of the stack is our Office side, which is Google, as the whole state moved to Google Workspace, as well as Data Studio, which I'm very curious about. Using these resources because we already have them, we're already paying for them, and everyone in our agency has an account. And it's a system that is allowed for, in this case, sharing, data edits, accounting processes, the actual report generation that we then send out by email, and so on. Now, to be honest, this is for me just a gateway drug to 𝐀𝐈𝐂 3. The reason why is because I think just by the time the system that I am proposing here is going to be really operational, we're going to be probably ready to move as an entire agency to big solutions like Salesforce and all the other CRM. So I'm sticking to the rapid process of the rapid turnover in development, but I do not think that this is a silver bullet we're looking at. So thank you for your time, and I hope you have questions. Go ahead and visit our official site for our services and our GIS hub for some of the apps that I mentioned. Thank you.
Wolfgang. and Matthew, that was wonderful. Does anybody have any questions for them? We have a few minutes. There were a few questions in the chat, Wolfgang, that I believe your colleague handled. That was wonderful. Thank you. Absolutely. Appreciate your presentation.
All right.
All right. We're going to go ahead and break. We are right on time, which is fabulous, a little ahead of time. So I'm going to go ahead and give you 10 minutes for a break. Come back at 2:10 and we'll have presentations from the Forest Service. So don't be late.
Okay, Tom, do you think you're ready?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
ready. We're ready to get started.
Okay. So I'd like to welcome everybody back to the second half of the presentation. And along with welcoming you all back, I'd like to introduce Tom Mellin. And then I think it's a back-to-back presentation of Tom Mellin and Candace Bogart from the U.S. Forest Service. So Tom is going to present today on the remote sensing as a tool in support of fire operations and post-fire assessments. He is the Regional Remote Sensing Coordinator for the Forest Service Southwestern region. Tom also serves as the National Infrared Program Manager for fire mapping across the U.S. So if you want to go ahead and start your presentation, Tom.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to share my video for a second and turn that off in a moment. Just want to say it's great to be here today. I'm sitting here in Albuquerque at the Forest Service Regional Office looking out the window at rain. And it's my favorite type of rain. It's rain that's actually reaching the ground. So a momentary reprieve as we begin the head into fire season here, which is the topic of my presentation today. So I kind of wear two hats for the purposes of this conversation. As she said, I am the Regional Remote Sensing Coordinator for the Southwestern region, and for the Forest Service that comprises the national forests in New Mexico as well as Arizona. And I also serve nationally as the National Infrared Program Manager. And what I'm going to focus on today are some national standardized and consistent government programs that cover a large portion, in some cases, of the large fires in the U.S., and in some cases, almost all, if not all, of the large fires in the continental U.S. And of course, one thing that comes with government programs are acronyms. So don't be scared off by this slide. Every one of these acronyms will be spelled out and explained later on in the slide. And just as a note, what you're looking at here is a photograph of the Bighorn fire from this past fire season that burned right up against the edge of Tucson that you see there. My focus today is going to be on the Southwest in 2020 because there was such an active fire season, particularly in Arizona last year. Most of my examples will be from the Southwest and particularly Arizona, and you'll see some previously well-known fires in Arizona as well as some from this last season. And the map there shows that the U.S. is divided up into these geographic coordination centers for the purpose of mobilizing and managing resources for incidents, wildfire, but also other natural disasters like floods, blowdown events, and volcano eruptions even within the US. We're going to focus on 2020 because that was a near record year for the southwestern geographic area. There were just under 3,500 fires that burned over 1 million acres, and that's the largest total we've had since back in 2011. And some of you may remember 2011 was the year of the Wallow fire that burned over almost 540,000 acres, and the Horseshoe 2 fire that burned another 250,000. So just two fires getting close to 750,000 acres back in 2011. But the thing about this last year is of those 1 million acres, almost all of that was in Arizona. And that acreage amounted to 165% of our 10-year average acres for the Southwest. And what that results in when you get that much fire activity is a lot of requests for imagery and derived products, both from the incident management teams managing the fire, to fire aviation management, the regional dispatches that are managing resources, as well as regional offices and forests that are asking for these products. And a lot of what I'll be talking about today, the programs, are supported by the Geospatial Technology Application Center, or GTAC, which is the National Technical Center of the USDA Forest Service for remote sensing and geospatial support. And these programs kind of fall into kind of three categories. We have active fire support that falls into both strategic and tactical. And with strategic fire support, we're going to be looking primarily at satellites that are used to detect fire across the entire continental US. For tactical fire support, we're drilling down to more of the incident level, and we'll be talking about the infrared mapping program that I manage that supports requests from incident management teams to get more resolute mapping on their fires. And then we'll transition into post-fire assessment support. You know, these fires have a huge impact on the landscape, and the effects, there are immediate effects, and those effects will last across decades. And we'll be talking about a number of programs, and I'll be providing you a lot of websites. So this is going to be a brief, quick overview today, but you'll have information when the PowerPoints or PDFs have shared to go and investigate further. The first one I want to talk about is the Forest Service Active Fire Mapping Program. And this is a program that basically pulls together a number of satellite resources, satellites that NASA and NOAA manage, and a lot of different sensors that I'll talk a little bit more about here. But the idea is to bring it all together in one place and provide some value-added products. And what those are can range from, you can get individual maps for different parts of the country, you can get some of the actual imagery, you can get the fire detection GIS data, or one thing that's really nice is they also have these Google Earth services. So you get a KMZ that you can download, and that will automatically update as the new detects come in. The maps are produced multiple times a day, and this is used by a lot of dispatches at the national and local level to facilitate decision support for strategic wildfire planning. So this isn't giving you that high resolution map that tells you the fire is on this side of this road or not, or within this drainage, or whether, you know, particular structures have been lost. This is a strategic level, not typically used for tactical support. The link is down here at the bottom. You can also just search for active fire mapping, and that will bring up the site. And the two main satellites that are most useful out here, or detection sensors on those satellites, are MODIS and VIIRS. You may have heard about. MODIS stands for Moderate Resolution Imaging Spectrometer, and that's been operating since 2000. And the benefit of these satellites is that they cover such a large area, you know, over a 2,300 kilometer swath width. And so you end up getting about 4 overpasses in a 24-hour period for the continental US. Now you're trading that frequency and coverage for spatial resolution. So this is 1 kilometer resolution. Again, a strategic broad view overlook at fire activity. We also, since 2012, have benefited greatly from the VIIRS satellite, Visible Infrared Imaging Radiometer Suite, that also covers a large area also about 4 overpasses a day, but the advantage here is a much finer spatial resolution. You know, still not as useful for tactical, but it does give a better picture of the actual shape and extent of the fires as they burn. And here's just an example of one of the maps for the Southwest. This is from last year on June 17th. And what you see here, it gives you the overview. And this is just zooming in. This was the Mangum fire up on the North Kaibab, and then the Bush fire. They were both burning right outside of Phoenix. And the satellite detections are colored by the periodicity of the detection. So the darkest reds are the last 6 hours, and then it transitions to yellow, which includes anything beyond the last 24 hours and going all the way back to January 1st. So it really gives you an idea, not just the broad footprint of the fire, but where the most recent growth is actually occurring. And here's another example going back to 2011, and this is the Wallow fire. You remember that, as I mentioned, ended up being over 530,000 acres as it burned right up to the edge of Alpine, New Mexico. So these are very useful for positioning of resources. We use them quite heavily in our infrared mapping program to determine the boxes for the fires that we're going to fly each night. This is just the cumulative MODIS hits for 2020 for New Mexico and Arizona. And so you can see again that most of that activity was centered in Arizona, and with the notable exception of the Mangum fire, most of it was in the southern half of Arizona, below the Mogollon Rim, where the fire season was very severe and continued quite a ways. Just showing here the 4 largest fires in Arizona last year. So now switching from that the strategic being the MODIS VIIRS satellite detections, the low spatial resolution, and that wide area that gives you that broad overview, less useful at the incident level. Now we're moving to tactical, e.g. NIROPS, the National Infrared Operations Program. That's finer spatial resolution. It's a quick turnaround of products, and the incidents use those to incorporate into operational plans at the incident level. The NIROPS program is headquartered at the National Interagency Fire Center that's already been mentioned here, and it goes back to 1969, and for decades has consisted of 2 Forest Service planes. Within the last year or two, we've also brought on a number of contractors with their planes and sensors, simply because the length of the fire season, the number of fires, and the size of those fires that we're getting. And then there is a crew of infrared interpreters, or IRIN, that's their fire position. These aren't full-time jobs. These are people who are signed up just like somebody gets called out to go fight a fire on the ground or with an incident management team, and they support multiple incidents. And the idea here is to provide that critical fire intelligence on what the fire is doing right now for the incident management teams. And the Forest Service planes have a Phoenix system installed for mapping fires, and a lot of numbers here. The important things are that it is a 2-channel thermal IR line scanner. And what that means is, because it's thermal IR, we can see through the smoke and the fire plumes. When a fire gets very active, it's usually, if you're just looking through the visible spectrum and up in the air doing recon flights, you can't tell where the actual fire is on the ground. And it gets worse the more active the fire is, because the more smoke and plume it's putting up. So this allows us to see through that and very accurately map. In addition, by being a line scanner, we can cover a large area, 6-mile swath, and yet still get high spatial resolution, a 3.5 meter pixel at nadir, as we fly about 10,000 feet above the ground. And the way this works is incident management team on a fire submits an order. Our planes, or one of the Forest Service or the contractor planes, go up, fly it. They image the fire. They post it to an FTP site that NIFC has. That imagery is then pulled down by the interpreter who's working remotely, and they produce GeoPDFs, KMZ files, and GIS-ready data that is then posted back up and utilized by the incident. Here's an example of those products that are produced for every fire, every night, and every fire that we fly. This is from the Mangum fire last year on the 16th of June. We map the extent and the concentration of heat. So you have the overall perimeter and then areas of intense heat where the fire is burning the strongest, and places we also identify area where there's widespread heat, but it's more scattered, and then just isolated heat sources. And we produce both the GIS data, the GeoPDFs, the logs, as well as KMZs. Now, these are internal products, and these aren't posted publicly. Occasionally, an incident management team will share one of these maps with the public, but in general, these are internal products that they then use along with other sources of intelligence to develop that official fire perimeter and map products. This is just an example of what that imagery actually looks like. This is the Mangum fire growth on some nights where it really took off, about 3 nights in a row. In this, it's a thermal image. The lighter areas are cooler, so you see those drainages with the cold area, and the darker areas are warmer areas. So there's either a forestry canopy that's keeping some of that Earth's heat in at night, or actual fire that's burning. And then the red pixels are where it's actually hot enough to trigger the fire detection algorithm. So this is one night, and then the next night it really took off, wind driven. And then the next night, they actually had to add a 3rd pass to capture all the growth as it kept going. As I said, the strong suit of this sensor and system is that we can get that tactical level spatial information over large areas. And here's an example of that Wallow fire again, over 500,000 acres. And just showing you from the start, 2 separate fires actually, how they merged together, and it just kept going. There is up against the edge of Alpine, and it just kept going. And basically it was taking them, by the time it got to this size, it was taking them about an hour and a half to fly the entire fire. And you can see there's multiple flight lines here. So I want to switch now. That is support that's given to the fires, the incidents that request it throughout the life of the fire. And at some point, those fires are out or nearly out, and they cease requesting those type of flights. And then the focus turns to the post-fire assessment. And there's a number of data programs, and they all have as their basis utilizing Landsat, previously just Landsat, but now also Sentinel satellite imagery to derive these products. And these are products produced by GTAC, the Geospatial Technology Application Center for Forest Service fires, and by USGS for Department of the Interior fires. So your BLM, Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, BIA fires. And so it's a joint effort. These two of these programs are joint efforts with the USGS. And the 3 different flavors of this post-fire assessment are here: the BARC, the burned area reflectance classification, the RAVAGE, rapid assessment of vegetation, and MTBS, monitoring trends in burn severity. And you may have heard of one or possibly all of these. And the key thing by utilizing Landsat imagery and Sentinel imagery is these are satellites that are continually on a regular schedule covering the Earth. And so there's always this archive of imagery, which is key because we have to have that pre-fire look to determine what changes we see on the landscape are a result of the fire and not some other agent. So Landsat 8, managed by USGS, it's tried and true, well tested and documented. This particular sensor on Landsat 8 is very similar to the Landsat sensor from Landsat 5 with some improvements. So that going back to 1984. It's a revisit time, every 16 days, it'll cover the same portion of ground. The resolution is 30 meters, so it's very good for something that's covering such a large area. And the delivery time is very quick. Usually that imagery is posted within 3 hours, within a half a day, they get it. So maybe not quick enough to be as useful for tactical work on a fire, but definitely the turnaround time is very good. The real game changer has been now we also have access to the Sentinel-2 satellites. These are satellites launched by the European Space Agency, and each satellite has a revisit time of 10 days, but because there are actually 2 of these satellites up, we get a revisit time of 5 days and a higher spatial resolution of 20 meters. The latency there is a little bit bigger, 1 to 2 days, which isn't as much of an issue for post-fire applications. And the nice thing is, in the development of these satellites, there was a lot of coordination with the Landsat satellites. So they're highly compatible with Landsat and create comparable products and have a lot of the same bands. And what that means is a lot of the algorithms that were developed for mapping various fire effects with Landsat, with a few tweaks, can also be used with Sentinel. And the other big thing about these satellites is, unlike a lot of the higher resolution satellites, they have shortwave infrared bands, which are particularly useful for measuring fire impact. So here's an example. It's actually quite an old example, but it's a good one, of a fire in Utah. You're looking at Landsat 5. If you're looking at the true color, it might be kind of hard to find out the exact extent of the fire. It looks like maybe it's here. We see some blackened earth, but we also see some dark earth here and over here. And even if we go to color infrared, we do see a noticeable lack of color infrared response. And here, the red is where you have actively photosynthesizing vegetation. So you see the golf courses, irrigated fields, and urban areas, and then a lighter response where you have forests and shrubs. And so the pattern starts to show up pretty good, but when you do a false color composite with using that shortwave infrared along with near infrared and red, it really pops out exactly where you have the effects of fire versus maybe some other impact on the landscape, such as maybe a previous fire, not so recent over here. So taking a look at these programs individually, that BARC, the Burned Area Reflectance Classification, is requested by BEAR teams when they come on, and BEAR stands for Burned Area Emergency Response, and these are teams that are called out for large fires to basically assess and the effects of the fire on soil and erosion and flood potential. So the BARC map that's produced from Landsat or Sentinel is the first approximation of soil burn severity, and the BEAR teams use it along with their sampling in the field to create that final BEAR map. Previously this was done with aerial reconnaissance flights and rather crudely. They didn't have the spatial resolution that you can have with 30 or 20 meter pixels. And the idea is this is the quickest turnaround product. This is supposed to be produced within 1 to 7 days after containment of a fire, because that's the timeline that the BEAR teams are under to get that report out to assess, are there places where we need to put in soil conservation structures, maybe do some reseeding or other mitigations. And so the deliverables are both the pre and post-fire satellite imagery, as well as the BARC layers, which are the thematic and continuous classification into severity classes. So here for that same image of the Mangum fire that you see there is the soil burn severity classification, with green being unburned, the teal being the low burn severity, soil burn severity, yellow being moderate soil burn severity, and red being the high severity. Then, so that's focusing on the soil. Then for Forest Service fires that burn in forested landscapes, we also have RAVAGE, which stands for Rapid Assessment of Vegetation. And this was specifically to assess reforestation and restoration needs. Specific funding comes from the Washington office, so they wanted information on, do we need to plan for replanting or reseeding? This has a little bit longer timeline, but still they want pretty quick turnaround, because the idea is to get the budget process rolling if needed. Delivers both the pre and post fire satellite imagery, much like the BARC, but the data layers they provide here are percent change in basal area and percent change in canopy cover. And then they also provide a typical 4-class burn category too, but with the focus on vegetation. And this example, I believe, this is actually the Las Conchas fire in New Mexico that burned right up against Los Alamos back in 2000. Oh, don't quote me that. I've seen too many fires. And then finally, we have MTBS, Monitoring Trends in Burn Severity. And this is the program with the widest brush, because this is a multi-year program that's gone all the way back to 1984 to present to consistently map the location, extent, and burn severity of all large fires across the U.S., regardless of what land they burn on and what vegetation type. And when they say all large fires, that means west of the Mississippi, any fire that was 1,000 acres or greater in size, and in the east, any fire that was 500 acres larger in size. And the idea was to look at national trends in burn severity over time, driven by the National Fire Plan and the Healthy Forest Restoration Act. So there's a longer revisit time after this. This isn't a quick turnaround product. They're looking at, for their post-fire imagery, they're going back a year, maybe a little more after containment, to kind of pick up all of the cumulative effects that might happen over the year. But also delivering pre and post fire satellite imagery and a 5-class thematic layer. And this is an example. This is the Landsat image of the Rodeo 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳𝐵𝐷𝐻 fire back in 2002. Well, also, that one ended up just short of 500,000 acres. Was by far the largest fire in Arizona history until the Wallow fire. And that also produces a 5-class thematic layer of burn severity. And I think the 5 classes, because they also have a class in there for vegetation regrowth. So again, that the BARC product, the burned area reflectance classification, speeds up emergency assessment of soil burn severity and has that quick turnaround. The Ravage product helps with the rapid assessment of vegetation mortality and is forest centric. And that's the one that's only a Forest Service program. And then the monitoring trends in burn severity helps us understand the larger trends in fire severity over time and across the entire country. And the neat thing is that all these programs have these new websites that are out here. And so I encourage you, and as you can see, some of them you can download data, or they have data viewers that you can get on with MTBS. And each one of these programs has their own website. But the easiest way is just to go to this burn severity portal, which USGS has just stood up. And the nice thing about that is it's a gateway to a lot of information, including it will get you to the websites for all those other programs, MTBS, Ravage, Bear, but also talks about some other programs, the Fish and Wildlife Service, Fire Atlas, National Park Service. So there's even an interactive viewer, direct download. You know, these are coming online, and there's a lot of good data out there. You know, some more information on the bark and the bear, and then takes you to the website where you can download, search back to previous historical fires. For the bark data, requesting the data here, you'll find that's only for people on the incident management teams. It's not for public requests. Hey, we'd like to get mapping done on this fire, but you can download a lot of the products. And with that, I believe I'm ready for questions. Probably have time for a few. And this is just an image of a number of fires outside of Phoenix. This is a Sentinel-2 image from September 26, kind of capturing the cumulative effect of a lot of those fires that occurred throughout Arizona last year.
Thank you, Tom. That was really interesting. Are those data products, are they free if I go to those sites and download?
Yeah, anything you download will be free.
Okay. I don't know, do we have any questions? Let's see.
Elizabeth Wolfgang had a question in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to get my full screen back so I can see the chat, but maybe if you can.
It's hard. Let me read it for you, Tom.
Okay.
His question is NIROP going to be replaced by drones?
No. So what NIROPS is, and I kind of focused on an individual incident, but these planes are taking off from one point and they may go and fly 15 fires across multiple GACs. So they may take off from Phoenix, fly fires in the Southwest, then head up to Utah, fly fires, and end up in Oregon. So obviously drones aren't going to be able to do that with airspace issues. Drones, I think, are particularly useful on individual incidents. And I think the uses of them are growing, and particularly for certain portions of the fire where they need a continuous look, because with, any remote sensing asset, any picture you take, that's a snapshot in time. And so we'll fly, when we're flying multiple fires a night, some fires are going to get flown earlier in the evening and some fires are going to get flown later. And having an asset that can provide you more real-time information and continuously focus on just your incident or just that portion of the fire is kind of the next step.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. Does anybody else have any questions for Tom? Well, thank you very much. That was really insightful. Thank you.
Sure.
And I think next up, right, we have Candace Bogart. Is Candace here and ready?
I am here. I'm here. I want to see, let's see, to share my screen.
Okay, and I'm going to introduce Candace here. The topic is Forest Health Series. It's imagery applications in the Southwestern region. Candace is the GIS coordinator and photogrammetry unit leader for the U.S. Forest Service Southwestern region. Candace lived and worked in several Western states, including Montrose, Colorado, Bozeman, Montana, and Santa Fe, New Mexico. Candace attended Kansas State University for a bachelor and master's degree in geography, natural resource management, and grew up in Kansas and traded that for the Rockies. And Candace enjoys hiking, rafting, and reading books about ecological issues. So with that, I will leave it to Candace. Take it away.
Thank you. I'm, let's see, I'm trying to start, okay, I was going to start my video. So hopefully you can you see, yeah, okay, great. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation today. I'm going to talk a little bit about imagery applications across the Southwestern region. I also would like to introduce Stephen Del Favero, our photogrammetry assistant, and Alec Gautreer, kind of our team that have helped put together a lot of this material. I wanted to just tell you a little bit about the background of our program. The Southwestern Regional Photogrammetry Program was initiated in the 60s. Some of the things that we do are resource photography, where we fly an entire forest or ranger district, as well as special projects, which include planimetric and topographic mapping, aerial photography, and LiDAR acquisition. We've flown a lot in Arizona. In fact, we have 1,000 rolls of film and over 174,000 exposures in Arizona. This is kind of an example of some of our work and what we do. This is an example of a flight plan that we have put together with the survey control. We would have done this for an engineering design. This is another example of an engineering design that we've done across in Arizona. This happens to be 𝐀𝐫𝐈𝐂 Lake and illustrates some of the contour, the survey, as well as the planimetric information contained for 𝐀𝐫𝐈𝐂 Lake. This project overview of, say, our resource photography. This was the Coconino. When we fly resource photography, this is 4-band 8-bit stereo imagery that is often DOQQ tiled and mosaic for ortho imagery. I wanted to talk a little bit more about our imagery and making that available. We've had over 50 years of imagery collection. I have down here a hub site, and I included a couple of posters earlier on. Hopefully you got that. We've collected a great deal of film across the southwestern region, including resource photos and special projects. This is an example of one of our photos. This happens to be a 1936 image of the Lincoln National Forest. Imagery, I guess, illustrates the condition of our landscape. In climate change, that can be very important as we look to the past to understand what is happening today. We have a historical imagery project going on where we are scanning and mosaicing over 300,000 film-based images and creating scanned mosaics of our forest epics. We're establishing workflows and data standards that can be used nationally. This is an example of our film and what it looks like. This happens to be the aerial photography field office in Salt Lake City. A good portion of those film cans are ours in the southwestern region. Why would we even want to put this together? One of the reasons is that it's difficult to find imagery, and if you can't find it, you can't use it. So there's an underutilization of our imagery. Secondly, there's a degrade in the film contained in the ball. I'm sure you might have heard of the vinegar syndrome and how our color fades.
Candace?
I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. We lost you one slide back.
There, how's that?
Better. I can hear you great. So one slide back is when we lost your audio.
Okay, thank you. So
Yes.
this is I just was illustrating a NAPE photo on the top and a 1958 resource image on the bottom. I wanted to talk a little bit about scanning the imagery. We are scanning our imagery and preparing it to be used by our partners or public. To do that, we take the film canister, archive it, that's archived, we scan it, ortho correct it, and create a GIS-ready ortho mosaic. This is what those ortho mosaics look like. This one happens to be a 1958 Carson Santa Fe. However, we are preparing numerous forests in Arizona. The value of having historic imagery leads us to something called image change estimation. We are working with our National Geospatial and Technical Applications Center to do what is called image change estimation, where they look at land use, land cover through time. Having historically scanned imagery allows this to take place. So a look at land use, land cover through time is capturing the imagery through time and then doing an analysis of the land cover that takes place. This is taking, as I said, some of the scanned imagery, using Metashape to ortho correct it, and summarizing changes in land use and land cover between these different time series. This is the land cover analysis that they're using. Land cover, land use, and the agent of change. It's called image-based change analysis. There can be great change over time. This is an example of what some of that looks like. The other thing I wanted to mention to you, as Tom was just discussing, is our post-fire imagery acquisition. This is a different kind of fire acquisition. This is using imagery shortly after the fire. We do collect post-fire imagery and have been doing so since 1972. This is very high resolution imagery. It can be 25 to 30 centimeter, 4-band stereo imagery. We often create orthophotography from it. It can be used for burn severity, structure loss, canopy cover, and erosion potential. This happens to be of the juniper fire, which was on the Tonto National Forest in 2016. It allows us to look at burn intensity. This happens to be the museum fire. This gives us a look at high intensity burn, erosion potential, and what happens to the canopy cover. Last year in 2020, we flew 6 fires: Mangum, Ike's, Castle, Museum, Cellar, and Woodbury, for a total of 374 square miles. There's a lot of advantage to having imagery of a fire. This one happens to be the 2011 Wallow fire. And this imagery, because it's such a high resolution imagery, we're able to discover burned structures, structures that were saved, and really get a sense of the landscape and the burned canopy. This again is a Wallow fire from 2011. I was using this because they're ortho-corrected. We are able to use GIS data sets, and this one I used buildings, and it would allow people to look at what needs to be discovered, what has been burned, the impact of the fire on the local community. This one happens to also be Wallow. I took a picture here of the 2010 NAEP. Again, this is structures, looking at structures shown in the 2010 NAEP. And through the imagery, you can see that many of those structures are now gone. It also gives you a sense of the soil, the burning of the soil, and the actual severity of the fire. This is a picture here of the contrast and the comparison between the Arizona 2019 NAEP and Magnum Fire 2020. So having that imagery really allows us to get a sense of what happens with the fire. I wanted to talk a little bit too about some of the new aspects of imagery that we're working on. And one of them is called FODAR. Thanks to the 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳𝐵 that was interested in the Mangum fire, which we flew, this imagery shows the Mangum fire on the 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳 post-burn. I think it's pretty obvious to see the heat intensity and the severe fire. Using software, the 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳 was able to generate a digital surface model using point clouds from the imagery. This can be useful for interpretation and quantifying canopy heights. I think it becomes pretty obvious to see here from the picture that we just looked at, the burned area in contrast to the unburned area. How exactly does this work? Overlapping photos are calibrated and used to identify features and create tie points between stereo imagery. A 3D dense point cloud is derived from the photos using structure from motion software. These point clouds are called FODAR. These FODAR points can be used to create a digital surface of the visible stereo imagery. The digital surface model can be used in combination with a bare earth model to create high resolution canopy height models. So here's another image of the Mangum fire, and this gives you an image of the surface model and using FODAR. The FODAR contains an X, Y, and Z coordinate as well as red, green, and blue. Sometimes the FODAR does not penetrate the canopy as well as LiDAR. However, imagery can have a much lower cost than LiDAR, and it can be very useful because it can be so responsive to collect imagery after a fire. The initial LiDAR can be also very useful. This is a point cloud derived from post-fire imagery. This one happens to be the tip over. This is the imagery with a 1 meter DEM derived from point cloud. Here we have the surface model. We have the contour derived from the point cloud, and the vegetation height model derived from the digital surface model minus the DEM. One of the other things that we're doing in Arizona as part of our understanding of the landscape is an aquatic riparian inventory. We are flying high resolution aerial photography to survey riparian areas across the Southwest. Overlapping stereo imagery is acquired. A FODAR point cloud is derived from matching features. This FODAR can be used to derive attributes from the imagery to determine certain riparian characteristics. This illustrates a hill shaded digital surface model and the orthophoto mosaic. So image text can be used to map stream banks and interpret land cover characteristics. In this particular project, we're flying 5 centimeter triplet stereo imagery. Surveys of over 200 riparian sites on the Prescott and Kaibab have been completed. This year, we are completing over 300 sites in both New Mexico and Arizona. 184 plots are planned for the Coronado National Forest. This kind of gives you an image of a riparian area. It's a 3D scene of an orthomosaic draped over the digital surface model. I did want to let you know that our fire imagery is available and on our World Wide Web, so that if you're interested in the fire imagery, we post this. As I mentioned, we've been flying imagery since 1972. And this imagery can be available, and you are welcome to that imagery. It can be ordered through the aerial photography field office. This is our site, our URL for information. We have a GIS data set page where a lot of our information, our GIS information, is kept. We provide a feature service, an AGIS layer, an ArcGIS layer file, and many GIS data sets that are available for download. I would also, if you're interested in what fire imagery we do have, we have listed on our webpage an Excel spreadsheet that lists the imagery that we have available. I also wanted to let you know that these were a couple of story maps I made available through Jenna, I think the other day, some posters to have you take a look at. Those posters talked about our land use land cover project, as well as our historical imagery project. These are some nice story maps that talk about historical imagery and the reconstruction of the timber sawmill we did using 1963 imagery. The timber sawmill was gone. It had been torn down, but we have the 1963 imagery, created a point cloud from the 1963 imagery and regenerated those buildings in a 3D geodatabase. This one is a LiDAR and imagery application and describes in more detail some of the use case that we have for our imagery. So I'll put those in the chat, and you're welcome to take a look at those. I just wanted to make you aware of some of the sources and of our imagery. It's available to the public, our partners, and internally. That we are working with now new software for interpreting and processing digital images that we never had before. I think with the advent of gaming, of drones, we are fortunate now where photogrammetric software and processes are being made available in current software. And now we can have that software on our desktops. We can acquire hundreds of acres in a short time frame. I know there was a mention about drones. We fly thousands of acres, and having a high resolution camera on a fixed wing can be very, can can obtain a large quantity of imagery in a short amount of time. Often our fixed wing cameras are accessible and reliable sensors. And we're working on a lot of additional visualization and modeling through our aerial photography. And so there's a lot of new products, and photogrammetry is now becoming more of a mainstream process and software. So I wanted to share that and let you know that we had these, are available, and we would like to make others aware of those. So thank you. I'll conclude there.
Thank you, Candace.
Yeah.
That was wonderful and very insightful. I think it's really, really helpful for folks to understand that there are more resources out there than they even know. I think that's, that's music to GIS ears. So thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Candace?
So I have a question for Candace. What exactly is FODAR?
FODAR is the, and I had one slide in there that talked a little bit about that, is creating a point cloud from hundreds and thousands and millions of tie points from stereo imagery. It works a little bit like a LiDAR, and it comes in a format like LiDAR. It can be, you can get it in a LAS format.
And so would you rather use one or the other? Or is there, is there a difference between when you would use one or the other?
There's a lot of thoughts about that. I think that LiDAR has an advantage in that it penetrates vegetation and canopy probably better than FODAR does. However, FODAR can be less expensive and can be, at some point, sometimes easier to mobilize. So there's advantages and disadvantages to both. I wanted to make you aware of it because we have historical imagery, and FODAR and point clouds can be derived from historical imagery, and there are many uses for it.
Thank you, Candace.
You're welcome.
Hi, Candace. This is Ben Hickson at the Association of Governments. I'm curious what you found in terms of vertical accuracy of photogrammetric versus LiDAR, and performance in areas of sparse canopy where it might not even model center structures.
There's been a lot of studies on that, and a lot of it depends on whether the photography has been controlled with survey, how having a block file that goes along with it, with the imagery, the scale and resolution of the imagery. So there's a lot of variety in that. There's been a number of studies done to compare and contrast them. I think, as I mentioned, LiDAR has the ability to penetrate canopy because it's an active sensor. So it can reach the ground, and in many cases can sometimes be better than FODAR. It depends on your application as well.
Yeah. I guess I ask. We have some photogrammetric data that we got from a vendor from 2019 to 2017, and kind of the urban environment where there's lots of solid above ground things like buildings. Those are fairly discernible, but whatever, I suspect it comes down to the algorithm that was being used and reconstructing the point clouds from the imagery that that was more selective for ground than vegetation and less urban areas.
Right, correct. And what they're also finding is that it depends. There's a lot of skill in the person, your contractor, and that some of the software they use can be better than other software. Like we're learning that Socket Set can be a superior software for creating point clouds, and just the skill that they use. So there's a lot of variables.
Yeah. Thank you. This is great.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Candace? That was really great. Very interesting.
I will put in the chat the story maps so that you will be able to use those.
Thank you. Oh, that's great.
Perfect.
Perfect. So do we have another break?
We do have another break. So we were going to give everybody just a minute to get up and move around, and then we'll come back for our final presentation for the day. So it's 3:04 now. We're going to give you 10 minutes. Please be back by 3:15. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to give folks just one more minute, and then we'll get started again. Hope everybody had a chance to get up and stretch and, you know, stay awake. It's that mid-afternoon nap time, right? All right, so we'll get started again and have Melanie give us our last presentation of the day. I'm excited to hear what Melanie has to share with us. Her topic today is about lessons learned and the recommendations for using decision support tools in forest and fire management. Melanie Colavito, is that how you pronounce it? Is that the right way? Great. Is the Director of Policy and Communications with the Ecological Restoration Institute at Northern Arizona University. Melanie directs government relations, public policy analysis, social science knowledge development, and application and communication services at ERI. Melanie is a social scientist with a background in researching the human dimensions of forest and fire management and has been with ERI since 2017. She has a PhD in geography with a minor in remote sensing and spatial analysis from the University of Arizona, and also completed a postdoctoral fellowship with the Alaska Center for Climate Assessment and Policy in Fairbanks, Alaska. Melanie was born and raised in Flagstaff, Arizona. She is motivated to work towards science-based collaborative solutions to restoration and climate adaptation with diverse partners across Western forest and woodlands landscapes. Welcome, Melanie. Thank you for joining us today to present.
Thank you, Jenna. And I'm realizing that the bio I sent you on the website is rather long, so sorry for making you read all of that. Let me share my screen and get this presentation going. And I always have to swap presenter view and slide view. Okay, are you seeing the slide view? Excellent. Well, thank you. It's really exciting to be presenting with AGIC. I previously worked a lot with AGIC when I was in graduate school at the University of Arizona, doing a lot of work with the Masters in GIS Technology program down there and working with Pima County and Arizona Cooperative Extension. And so I've since moved on to more social science work, but it's good to be back, and I see a lot of familiar names in the participants list. So good to kind of see you all virtually, and I'm excited to share some of this work with you. As Jenna mentioned, I am now the Director of Policy and Communications at the Ecological Restoration Institute. For those of you that are not familiar with ERI, we are one of 3 congressionally authorized Southwest Ecological Restoration Institutes. Our missions are to develop primary ecological restoration science, both biophysical and social, and then work to translate and transfer that science to all affected entities working in land management across the Southwest. So we really do focus on developing action-oriented, actionable, user-friendly scientific information.
That being said, what I'm going to share with you all today is a little bit different than what you've heard from some of the other speakers, but I do hope that the general topic and the lessons learned are applicable no matter what realm of GIS technology you might be working in. And so I'll set up the context for this research, which is a social science study, here in just a minute, but I do want to just sort of set the stage for indicating that these lessons learned are broadly applicable, and that as somebody who's worked both in the GIS technology itself and then also sort of studied the use of this technology and studied the use of science, I really hope that these can be helpful to you as you go about using and developing GIS tools to help inform decision making. So with that, I just want to start with a brief overview of the context for this particular study. So what we were really looking at was the role of decision support tools in the context of pre-fire planning. And so I know we heard from Tom and Candace about a number of tools, many of which were sort of tactical scene of action during fire, some post-fire tools. What I'm focusing on in the context, again, is really more in that pre-fire planning realm, and I'll give you some examples of the tools that were in the purview of this in just a moment. So within the realm of pre-fire planning, there are a number of different directives at different levels that call for some assessment, collaborative assessment of wildfire risk. So I'll go over a couple of those in just a moment. At the same time, there are many different methodologies that exist, many different tools and frameworks and software platforms that give you the ability to analyze pre-fire risk or wildfire risk assessment or sort of identify areas for treatment. So the fact that there are multiple directives and the fact that there are multiple tools can sometimes lead to confusion or frustration or defaulting to not using new technology. And so really the purpose of this study from a social science perspective was to really demystify some of the confusion around these pre-fire planning decision support tools and figure out how can we better apply science and technology to decision making in the context of forest and fire management. So just to give you an overview of some of the examples of those pre-fire planning or wildfire planning directives, a lot of this stems from this concept of all lands, all hands, which in the realm of forest planning is kind of this concept that management affects landscapes and that our ecological disturbances, such as fire, occur across a landscape, not necessarily following in line with jurisdictional boundaries. And so it's helpful if we can think about management across those landscapes and address and develop common goals that fit more along with the trends in our disturbances rather than the differences in our jurisdictional entities. So examples of directives or frameworks or sort of concepts that try to realize this are the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy, which has kind of three main components: restoring and maintaining landscapes, developing fire adaptive communities, and having a safe and effective response to fire. Another more recent framework that kind of operationalizes this concept is the Forest Service's Shared Stewardship Initiative, which is really kind of this idea of prioritizing doing the right work in the right place at the right time. And then we have even more specific types of guidance. For example, in the context of the Forest Service, which is sort of, I'll explain in a moment where the study really took place. We have a particular handbook and manual that focuses explicitly on sort of rules for how we go about doing this. And so that's Forest Service Manual 5140. And this is just a sampling of examples that talk about this idea of how do we collaboratively plan in advance of fire using these spatial tools. So it's always really important in social science and any science to define your terms. So before I get any farther, I want to define some terms for you. So one that I've thrown out quite a bit already are decision support tools. Now you don't need to read all the text in that table there, but really what decision support tool broadly refers to in this context are the different frameworks, models, analysis methods, products, and tools that provide information about wildfire risk. So this is our broad array of spatial fire planning tools. So when I use the term DST or decision support tool, that's what I mean. Now, that may not be agreed upon by everyone in the field, but I just want to explain how I am using it today. The second term that I've been using already a little bit is wildfire risk assessment. This one has a more specific definition. Thompson and others, it defined this as a product or process that collects information and assigns values to risks for the purpose of informing priorities, developing or comparing courses of action, and informing decision making. So these are our approaches for characterizing fire risk. And then lastly, I've used this term a little bit, treatment prioritization. These are kind of maybe another side of the same coin, but it's a little bit of a different concept in terms of looking at where we're going to treat hazardous fuels to reduce that wildfire risk. So these are our approaches for determining where to optimize vegetation treatments in order to minimize the wildfire risk on the landscape. Okay, so let me dive right into the study itself, since I know we only have a short period of time. I could talk about this all day. So the main questions that I'm going to go over with you all today are sort of what spatial fire planning decision support tools are commonly in use for wildfire risk assessment and treatment prioritization, what are barriers and facilitators to the use of these tools, and what are recommendations for improving the use of these tools. And again, even though this study was done in that context of forest and fire management, I really do think a lot of what I heard could be applicable in many different decision-making environments. So a quick overview of methods. I use semi-structured interviews in order to collect data on this particular study. There were 27 different respondents. What I usually do in social science is you collect interviews until you reach what's called information saturation, or you're not hearing new things from people. And so I was really kind of reaching saturation around 25 interviewees, hearing the same things from from different people. Interviewees were from the states of New Mexico, Colorado, Montana, Oregon, Arizona, Idaho, California, and Minnesota. So we weren't geographically constrained to one state, but it was sort of the Western United States is the context in which these questions were asked. 81% of the respondents, or 22 of them, worked for the U.S. Forest Service. So the context for the study was largely focused on forest and fire planning with respect to the U.S. Forest Service. And then I've classified the respondents, and I'm going to mention this now because I'm going to share some interview quotes with all of you that are given based on the different types of respondents. So 6 of the respondents are what I would characterize as scientists or developers. Those are the people whose primary job is to develop new research or to develop decision support tools, and they're really more focused on the technology end of things and making models. Then we have a group of people that I refer to as boundary spanners. Now, boundary spanners are people that tend to kind of go back and forth between the scientists and developers who are working to build the tools, and then the end users or the managers who are using the tools, and they help to communicate and translate in this two-way direction between those spheres of science and management. And then we have managers, and those are people who I characterize as those are the folks making management decisions on the ground. All right, so jumping straight here into some findings. So one of the first things, and I mentioned I would do this, is I wanted to understand what are some of the decision support tools that are most commonly in use with partners and the Forest Service who are working to characterize wildfire risk and determine where our priority areas are for wildfire risk to treat. So I've classified these into a couple of different buckets because a lot of different things were mentioned to me over the course of this study. And so this is in no way a complete census, and I don't want it to be characterized as a complete census of tools. This is just to give you some context for the findings on barriers, facilitators, and recommendations that come next, and also to kind of trigger some of the, maybe you've heard of some of these tools or data sets in your work as in the realm of GIS. So one bucket that I characterized some of the decision support tools that were referenced were those that are more focused on the realm of data. So data as input to some kind of a model. So we had land fire was a commonly used data source. And those are geospatial layers that provide vegetation and fire and fuels information. Another data source that was commonly referenced was FSVEG, which is short for field sampled vegetation. This provides us information about fuels, and sort of our vegetation database. And then lastly, we have FIA, or our Forest Inventory and Analysis Program, which is a national census of forest data. So that's some of the context for the data sources. Another bucket of decision support tools that were referenced by interviewees are those that pertain to providing information about wildfire risk. So this is more in the realm of what is our probability of a fire starting. And there are a number of different tools out there that can provide us with this information using some different types of frameworks. So I'm not going to go into detail on all of these. These are just different approaches to characterizing how fire moves across the landscape and the probability of it burning based on sort of different characteristics on that landscape. So FlamMap, Farsight, FSIM or LFSIM, FS Pro, and Behave are all different modeling systems that simulate fire. And they all kind of stem from the original sort of Rothermel equation, but I'm not going to go into that today either. Then we have another bucket, and those are methods or platforms that take that wildfire risk and process it and add some additional information to create outputs that build on our understanding of wildfire risk to give us a more complete picture of sort of values at risk across the landscape. So we're not necessarily always assuming that fire has a negative impact. Fire can also have a positive impact. And so there's different ways that we can take that wildfire simulation, add some additional information to it. And so I've kind of created this second bucket of methods or platforms. They're sort of second order products, if you will. So we have a number of different sort of scales that these tools can provide information across different geographic scales, different resolutions, spatial and temporal. And so they include the wildfire hazard potential, which is a national map of burn probability. We have wildfire risk to communities, which is actually an interactive website that provides national scale assessment of wildfire risk to communities. WFDS, or the Wildland Fire Decision Support System, was put into this bucket because it's more of a platform, but it can do some of this modeling that provides decision support information using wildfire simulations, does a lot of other things too. A framework called Quantitative Wildfire Risk Assessment, which is a modeling process that assesses our highly valued resources and assets across the landscape, can kind of tell us if fire would be negative or positive depending on how those values are assigned. And then lastly, we have potential operational delineations, or pods, which is a newer framework that kind of provides different fire response options across the landscape. So just for some context, again, not a full census. And then lastly, there were a handful of tools mentioned that are more in that fire hazard realm, that are a little more focused on our vegetation rather than simulating fire. Sometimes these get combined with the fire simulations. So again, it's like a little bit of a gray zone. But this is maybe more in our wildfire hazard or vegetation space. And so some of those tools included Forest Vegetation Simulator, which kind of models forest growth depending on different inputs. LSIM, Scenario Investment Planning Platform, which was formerly the Landscape Treatment Designer, that kind of can look at resource allocation and budgeting. We have ARC Fuels, which uses FVS and fire behavior models to provide decision support. And then we have another platform called IFTDIS, which is the Interagency Fuel Treatment Decision Support System, that again can do some of this fire modeling, but can give us priority areas for treatment. So that was a lot to throw at you. I just wanted to provide that brief context to inform sort of how these recommendations were then developed. Again, that was not a complete census of tools. That was just what was referenced by my interview participants. So the next question that I really wanted to understand from people was, how do you define a decision support tool? There's really no good definition that's established in the fire community or the forest management community. And so I think what I'm seeing is that a lot of people have maybe varying definitions of what that means. And we also see other terms like decision support system. And so it was important to kind of understand, what do people think of when they hear this? So respondents emphasize that when we're defining a decision support tool, there's a distinction between a couple of things. So there's a distinction between the data that go into the tool, so like our geospatial layers, There are decision support tool platforms like a software program that provides some sort of higher level analytical function. So they take the data and do something with it. And then there are outputs such as maps or tables. And so we're kind of breaking it out into these component parts. Respondents also emphasize the distinction between informational resources, so say like a website, and a tool, so say like a software program. It was also noted that decision support tools do not make decisions. They are things that can provide input to a decision-making process, and they can be conceived of broadly. So I like to pull out some quotes. One manager said, "Anything that helps inform a decision better than what you would have otherwise had available to you is a decision support tool." All right, so now I'm going to review some of the barriers to the use of decision support tools. So again, one of the objectives of this study was to understand, how are these tools being used? I'm not really going to go into that data so much just because of lack of time, and then also kind of understanding, what's inhibiting use of these tools, and talking about that confusion that can arise from having a lot of different tools out there, having a lot of different frameworks. So how do we demystify some of that? So some of the barriers that were mentioned include, and I've broken this down into a couple of key themes. So the first theme was that there are persistent tensions and cultural issues that impact the use of decision support tools. So this, in the context, for those of you in the Forest Service, maybe this makes a lot of sense, but I think this makes a lot of sense in other types of agencies too. But there's sort of this tension between a desire for top-down directives that say, hey, use this decision support tool, versus a desire for grassroots bottom-up development of new tools that sort of integrate the end user's understanding. And so what we really see is this tension between some people really want the top to say, hey, here's the tool to use and how to use it, and other people really want it to, tools and technology to be developed organically. So a couple of quotes that capture that. One manager said, "Everybody wants to be the tip of the spear, be the most advanced, but you've got to organically build that within your fire program for it to be useful." On the flip side, another person said, "It really needs to be top down and again, in the Forest Service perspective, it forces you to say, hey, this is what we're doing, and I want you to make sure all your staff is coming along." Having those line officers giving the same message so everyone's on the same page. So really that tension between top down versus bottom up. Another barrier that was identified is that there are capacity issues that can inhibit both the development and use of decision support tools. And I think that this is something that we really see in all different types of land management agencies. So with things like personnel turnover, vacant positions, slow hiring, they can lead to this persistent need to re-educate on decision support tools. And so that can sort of create a capacity issue in terms of folks that don't necessarily have the background or the training. Another big capacity issue is that there are not enough analysts out there, especially in agencies. And those analysts that do exist are really oversubscribed. So they're trying to do a ton for a lot of different people. And so really there's sort of a lack of the technical and analytical capacity. And so one person said, "I think we need capacity on both sides, those folks that communicate and work with groups, as well as those folks that can create the analytics, and both lack. There are, of course, good people out there. They're just tasked with other things." Another barrier that came up is that there are sort of technical challenges, and complex information and decision support tools can create confusion and impact perceptions of their accuracy and usability. Basically, what this means is if it's hard to use, it might not be super appealing for people to, use a new tool readily. So for example, if you're running a fire and you're trying to use a new tool and things aren't going well, that can be really problematic. And so things like technology malfunctions or just data and model limitations, all of these technical challenges and complex information can just make it hard. And so as one manager, I was hinting at this quote, one manager stated, "If you're running a fire, if you have to monkey with your iPad and now this isn't working, whatever's going on, you're just going to go back to your steno pad." So, in these high intensity situations, if a tool, a technology is being problematic, whether that be the decision support tool or simply the technology that it's running on, that can sort of create a perception of people not wanting to use it. Another barrier that was mentioned was that strategies for integrating decision support tool outputs into decision-making processes, such as a program of work, are often lacking. So what that means is a lot of time we saw that a really great new technology or a new type of map would be in production, and there'd be a lot of great effort put into it. It'd be super relevant and would be really applicable to the field. But then the implementation strategy for actually, like, how do we make this part and parcel of our day-to-day business wasn't always there. And so sometimes processes would end with the production of a really good tool or the production of a really good tool output, and then it wouldn't like officially be integrated into a program of work. So really a lack of implementation plan or a lack of training for end users on how to use these tools was another barrier. So one scientist said a big issue is the forests and regions. They get the data, they say we have our QWA, we have our pods, I'm throwing some acronyms at you, just different decision support tools, and people don't know how to interpret it, so they need a little bit of assistance or a little bit of training. And then lastly, the last barrier that I'll mention is that institutional issues and governance barriers can really inhibit the use of these tools, the use and integration of decision support tools. So it's important to note that different types of agencies face different types of barriers. You know, universities face different types of barriers versus land management agencies versus agencies dealing with water. So there's all these different kind of competing jurisdictional, you know, directives that can butt up against each other and just make it difficult to systematically use new technology in a cohesive way, especially when we're talking about land management objectives that cross jurisdictional boundaries. So that could just be really, really challenging. And then there can also just be a lack of clarity from the top about what should be used. And so as one scientist said, there just hasn't been a lot of help out there to direct forests on okay. So now how do we take the next step of we have all this great information, how do we integrate it into our program of work? All right, so I see I have about 10 minutes left. Hopefully Jenna stop me if I'm wrong on my timing here. So I should be ahead of time. The next thing that I wanted to understand was, well, okay, so it's always one thing to complain and we can all like kind of talk about what's not working, but what's working really well. I want to also understand like what are our successes? So what are the facilitators to the use of decision support tools? So there were some really important things that were brought up by interviewees about what's working really, really well when it comes to trying to use new technology in decision making. So one of those was that decision support tools spur new conversations and facilitate communication. So a lot of different examples were given that fit within this theme. One of them is really that we can see conversations occurring within agencies, even across different resources, within different parts of a single agency. We can also see new conversations occurring around these tools between different agencies and between agencies and the public and stakeholders. So we're really seeing more cross-boundary communication, sort of because people will come together around a decision support tool because it provides this common space, especially through things like visuals, maps, and other outputs for joint decision making and a forum for creative thinking, a forum for conversation. So we're really seeing that these tools can spur dialogue that's really, really productive. So as one manager said, we had the fire management officers, line officers drawing maps together, putting lines on the maps and thinking about things from all their various history in their heads in addition to the data. Another facilitator that was mentioned was that this process of developing and using tools can really impact their perceived effectiveness. So a lot of what I was hearing with some of these new tools is that there's this conscious effort to really take a more iterative approach where it's not just, you know, the developers coming and saying, here's a new tool, bye, like good luck using it. It's like, what do you need in order to inform your decision making? And how can we help improve your management process and develop a tool that's relevant to the decision space in which you work? And so this sort of iterative, sustained engagement can really impact in the development of a tool or the development of decision support tool outputs can really impact the effectiveness of using those tools. As one scientist said, the iterative process of working with fire managers, so they're owning it, it's their information, we're just helping support the development of it, learning where our model's working well and where our model's not working well. And then lastly, the last facilitator was that decision support tools can enhance the legitimacy of our decisions. really, by creating these outputs with a lot of input from partners across boundaries or across with, boundaries within an agency or between agencies, it can really provide rationale that justifies funding for projects, can quantify and institutionalize local knowledge that can be hard to capture other ways. So say you have some managers who work on the ground that really know some stuff in their heads, you can capture that through a decision support tool and sort of institutionalize it in that way. And so as one manager said, that institutional knowledge, I feel it lies in a few hands. Some folks have it, but if those folks retire, that information is lost. If you capture it, it's more institutional, it's more corporate, it will be retained. All right, so lastly, I just want to run through some of the recommendations. So these are not my recommendations, and I want to be clear about that. As part of this study, I asked people to really help provide some input about, all right, so here's what's working, here's what's not working so well, what really needs to change in order to help us better use tools like GIS tools in decision-making processes. So these recommendations stem from the interview findings themselves. And of course, I've captured them into some different themes. So one of those recommendations, and I've kind of broken them down by different audience types as well. So one of them is a universal recommendation, and I hope that this would apply to anyone listening to this talk today. But communication about decision support tools or technology must be done in a common language, especially when we're working with partners that might not have the technological background or might have a different type of background. So it's really important to build a common language and then sustain use of that language through time. That can really enhance sort of the trust and the relationships that go into using these things over time. So as one manager said, being available, continuing to engage with the folks that are going to be the ones making decisions, that's going to be the most important thing. The second recommendation is more for folks that might characterize themselves in that scientist or developer realm. And that is that it's really important to first determine the question that a decision support tool is meant to inform, and then develop or apply it accordingly. So it's kind of like reverse engineering. So really we're starting with what is the management question? What is the decision space? And then we're going to work backwards from that and really build a tool that, if we want to build tools that are informing management, we're going to reverse engineer the process. And we're really seeing that a lot more. And so this isn't to suggest that this isn't happening. This is certainly a process that we're seeing more and more frequently. But I think it's really important to remember to always emphasize this. Let's start with the management question. And so as one boundary spanner said, early on in a process, define what a management question actually is that needs decision support. All right, another recommendation more in the scientist and developer realm, but decision support tools should be validated and tested with end users. I remember my favorite quote from a remote sensing professor at the University of Arizona was that all good remote sensing projects start on the ground. So this is sort of similar to that, which is that really we can build great technology, we can build great maps, but it's always important to get out on the ground and validate it and test it with our end users. So basically, as one boundary spanner said, after you've drawn stuff on a map, you need to get out in the woods. So this recommendation is more for folks that might characterize themselves as managers. It's really important that implementation planning can ensure that those decision support tool outputs are used. So again, one of those barriers that I mentioned was that sometimes these processes stop with the creation of the tool, but they don't address how do we integrate that tool into our program of work. And so it's really important to consider that component. And so as one manager said, the biggest recommendation I have is once you start and you pick a tool, get your stuff, get your folks on a schedule and stick to it. All right, the next few recommendations are maybe a little more challenging to accomplish and maybe more for those folks that would characterize themselves in that leadership realm. The one that's maybe the least difficult to accomplish is that leadership intent for integrating and using decision support tools should be clearly articulated through policies, guidance, and authorities. So we see a lot of different guidance out there. And so it's important that for those folks on the ground that they understand, what do you want me to be using? And so it's important to really articulate that. And so as one manager said, I have a dream. We needed an integrated approach, a commitment to structured risk-informed decision-making. And if one of the next steps is some assessment of the analytical capacity in the agency, I'm going to skip over some of this, but if we use a structured decision-making approach, I think we might actually come up with a fairly reasonable set of next steps. Next, analytical capacity and funding to develop, integrate, and use decision support tools needs to be increased. Now, it's easy for me to say we need more capacity, we need more funding. That's a lot harder to realize, but I think it is important to note that if we want end users, if we want managers to be using these tools, we need to support the existing analysts who are really, really busy. We also need to increase the analytical capacity as much as possible. So as one manager said, if we want people using these tools, all four of us need to invest in people that can use them. And then lastly, decision support tool end users need both education and training in the concepts and tools. So sometimes we see that there's a select group of folks that really know these tools well. Sometimes that includes your developers, your managers, your boundary spanners. But if we want to more broadly have them be used throughout the field, that education and training component is really important. So as one person said, our line officers and fire managers need to be educated in risk. And this also addresses sort of the concept of risk more broadly. Not just trained, but educated. Training tells you how to go through step A to step B or C or D. Education gives you the ability to work on a problem and apply concepts. Right now, most of our folks are not well educated in risk or educated at all in risk. So maybe I lied, I'm not going to have a ton of extra time, but hopefully I'll get there right at the top of the time limit here. So some of the key takeaways. I mentioned there are many barriers to the use of decision support tools in this context of wildfire risk and treatment prioritization, but they're not insurmountable. Many of the recommendations from interview respondents include efforts that are already underway with varying levels of complexity and difficulty, but should definitely be continued. One place that I'm not going to get into too much today is to really, we already kind of saw some of this from the presentations earlier, is to really begin to characterize and organize our existing tools in such a way that they fit into the understanding of our end users, so that end users could really kind of sort through the different tools that are out there and find the one that makes the most sense for a particular decision question or decision context. And so I think that really applies beyond just the realm of forest and fire management. And I hope that some of these lessons learned can be gleaned into other realms of natural resource management as well. So with that, there's additional resources. There's a report on the ERI website at that link. A journal article was also just recently published on this study. And so you can find those two resources, those links. And then I just thank you all for your time and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Melanie. That was great. So here's a question. So what exactly, how would you classify a decision support tool? Can a simple map be a decision support tool?
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Or does it have to be a complicated application, right, with like various inputs and then outputs? I was always confused by that.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So yeah, I guess the way that I'm thinking about it is that you could, certainly a simple map could be a decision support tool. Often our simple maps have a lot going on behind the scenes, right? It really, I guess, would depend on the map that you're talking about. But typically you have some data. Maybe it goes through a modeling process. That's sort of, so there's the distinction between our data inputs, our sort of modeling framework or tool, and then our decision support tool output, which could be a map. Now, sometimes that data can stand alone as a map, right? You can portray data that hasn't gone through additional analysis by itself as a map. And so I guess at any point in that process that I'm describing, you could have a map that provides varying levels of information. And so it really would depend on your situation. But yeah, I think any map can be a decision support tool if it's being used to provide information that's informing that decision-making process.
Okay.
Did that help clarify?
Yeah, that's one way to see it.
Sure, one way to see it, yeah.
Do we have any other questions? I'm trying to look. I don't know if Jenna, do you see any questions?
See anything in the chat, but if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to take yourself off mute for a minute and ask Melanie directly. All right. Well, thank you, Melanie. That was really insightful.
Thank you.
That was great. Yeah, we we'd like to thank everyone who presented today. I think these were great presentations. So thank you to Susan and Nick from the ASU Kyle Center, to Wolfgang and Matthew from Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management, to Tom Mellin and Candace from the USDA Forest Service, and to Melanie, from NAU, the Ecological Restoration Institute. And I think we'll be putting together a short feedback survey for the attendees. We'd love to thank everybody for attending today. Think about if you have a presentation, about a particular topic that you'd like to talk about in the future, let the AGIC Natural Resource Group know. I think we're all learning from one another. I think this is a great forum for sharing information.
I really agree. As part of the follow-up and the feedback, I'm going to beg all of you. I'm going to put a link in the chat now, and I'll send it out to everybody too. But there is a part of that feedback where you can provide suggestions on topics, any other feedback that you think would be really useful for us. I encourage you to give that. We're really appreciative of your time today. I think that today was super successful. So I'm pleased we could host.
It was a lot of fun. It was really interesting. We had some really interesting presentations. Thank you.
Oh, I duplicated Yata. So you guys have got it twice. That means that you get to take it twice, really. Thank you, everybody. I will have the recording and a follow-up email to everybody that registered. Really, thank you for your time. You guys make this all possible. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Are you done?
Almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.